overall, it's actually a great thing when that happens, probably, but it will cause some sort of a small financial disruption. Okay. Okay, so we know why school deficits can occur, but how could this possibly be happening? I get this question a lot because at the end of the day, schools are not for-profit institutions. They are first and foremost our lifeline for educating New York City students. So bullet number one, funds for school budgets under fair student funding are allocated based on the number and the need level attributes of attending students. Okay, so the second bullet, budget allocations are based on an enrollment projection of students. And again, I can't underscore that when a school experiences a loss in enrollment that makes their enrollment land lower than it was originally projected, that's when you have that budget deficit occur. And it's not unusual. This happens every year. Schools are typically asked to repay funds that were allocated per child under that fair student funding formula. And, that applies to students who are no longer enrolled at the school for whatever the reasons may be. Okay. All right, here, I'd like to point out that there are some past policies that have already been in place from 2014 to 2019. The schools were subject to a deficit repayment plan because, again, it's not unusual for enrollment losses to happen at any given school. In 2020, there was a slight change to the deficit repayment plan. And you can see that if schools were carrying any unpaid deficits from 2018 and earlier, those deficits were actually forgiven, which is a great thing. But normally you can see, there's a scale less than 100,000, 100% of the money would be due back at the end of the school year. If schools had deficits between 100 to 200,000, they pay a portion, and they're also given a credit if they can pay, the full amount. There is a reduction that they've given credit for. And for any deficits 200,000 or more, they were given a 3-year installment plan. And again, that installment plan, that's how you would wind up having to roll a deficit from one year into the next year. One of the ways. Okay, so on this chart, I just wanted to kind of share globally. On a borough-wide basis, I found that average school deficits were largest in 2018. This is based on some of my prior research. And as you can see, I stop at 2020. I have not, as of yet, fully compiled and looked thoroughly at everything for 2021, but I'm quite certain that 2021 is probably going to blow 2018 out of the water. So I am definitely expected. And let me also just point out again, I looked at average school deficits on this slide. Okay. This table I compiled average school deficits, a review of Manhattan schools. There are some things here that I definitely would like to point out that will be of interest. On our top line, I took a look at the number of schools with deficits, and you can see that normally it falls anywhere from 100 schools to 278 schools. This year for 2021, I have learned recently that there are 879 schools with deficits. It's not on the chart. I haven't updated it yet. And I haven't done my full analysis, but I'm expecting all the numbers for 2021 to really blow everything away that I had looked at prior to now. Manhattan schools with deficits, traditionally, you can see the trends anywhere from a low of 24 schools to as many as 70 schools. And the share out of, the total dollars, Manhattan schools have comprised, roughly a quarter to 30% of the share. The dollar value of all deficits of all schools in 2020 was 35 million, 35.5 million. And I can add that in 2021, the total dollar value of all deficits is 177 million. Huge jump up. Okay. Manhattan school deficits before credits has been anywhere from, 3 million to 9 million, so forth and so on. I did take a look at the number of schools with prior year deficits. In 2020, there were 42 of them that landed that had a deficit in the prior year. I will be looking to try to update this chart for 2021, and I don't know. I'm not expecting it to be, good results based on everything that I am hearing on the ground and the preliminary information that I have received. Okay. Post-COVID considerations, what can be done? What do you say to the schools in times like this? What do you do? How can you help? These are the questions that I'm hearing that are on everyone's minds. And, first and foremost, I would say that it's probably helpful to think about broadly what are the reasons for the current enrollment declines. We know right now in this environment, COVID is the likely culprit. But I think if you would like to, it would be helpful to have schools think, is this a temporary 1-year upset, or have we been experiencing declines over a period of time? That's something worth thinking about. Is the decline definitely related to the pandemic, or were we, having problems losing enrollment prior to now? Is this a new problem or an old problem? It's not going to really provide a solution, but it may help to think about it in those terms as well. You can also think about what are the school priorities that are driving budget decisions in tight times. Schools definitely will have to come to a reckoning right now about what their priorities are. Are we trying to maintain staff? Are we trying to maintain class sizes? Are we going to struggle to pay for unexpected or new needs? I mean, those are all questions that, can be helpful in really trying to think about, what the priorities are. When times are bad, you definitely do have to come to some sort of reckoning, because you just may not be able to satisfy all needs. So it's important to make sure that you are putting the right things first, and in terms of advocating and speaking with the schools, I think definitely it's a worthwhile exercise to encourage anyone and working in the schools and working with the budgets to be thinking about, what are the real priorities here, because cash is not flush. The city is still claiming a $5 billion deficit. The state is claiming a $15 billion deficit. So we don't know what's going to happen. Stimulus money is going to come, but we've got to keep in mind that this might be a one shot, just like ARA was. It's most likely a one shot. So again, is our problem a temporary problem, or is it a long-term problem? If it's a long-term problem, maybe we're not going to lean as much on one shot money to fix every single thing. And I am open for questions.
Mark, are you taking the questions?
Okay. Why don't we stop the screen share so we can see each other?
There we go.
And we have only 5 attendees other than the community board members. So to facilitate discussion, maybe I'll just promote all of them. Is that okay, Courtney and Blanche?
Sure.
Fine with me.
And then we can see everybody and they can see each other and all of that. I only see Bev with her hand up so far, so co-chairs, take it away.
I'm going to ask a basic question, if you don't mind. Bev, I'll make it brief. A lot of us don't know the full scope of activities and work of the Independent Budget Office. I think that's the case. And I think, Yolanda, if it's possible, just to give us very broadly and briefly what the IBO does. I guess basically what I'm thinking, we may feel that you deal only with the education budget, or do you deal with the budgets of other city agencies? That's just sort of setting a platform for who the IBO is.
Yes. So sorry I didn't give you this intro to IBO to begin with, but essentially we are a small city chartered non-mayoral agency. We are tasked with analyzing really every city agency. I like to think of us as we are modeled after the Congressional Budget Office. And I like to think of us as really a counterpoint to the mayor's office of budget, a counterpoint in the sense that, we do have mandates on us to analyze the mayor's budget when it comes out, and we do revenue estimates and forecasts as well as expense budget analysis. And I do feel we, our target audience, if you will, our constituency, if you will, are the public at large, any other advocacy groups, certainly state and other, how can I say, state and other entities that might want to ask us to do analysis. We dig in and do it. So, if the public advocate's office wanted us to look at an issue of an agency, we certainly do it. And really, again, we review every city agency, education. I happen to be on the education team, but we look at everything. We've got somebody doing housing. We've got somebody doing sanitation, MTA, you name it. We have an analyst assigned to it.
Okay, Thank you so much. Bev, I jumped ahead of you. I apologize.
Not a problem. That's the right of the co-chairs. I wanted to add something to your description of the IBO, which I've relied for years on your kind of wonderful analysis, and it's all on your website, and I find that extremely helpful. But a few years ago, it's my understanding that the IBO also picked up additional responsibilities for education specifically. And it'd be helpful if you talked a little bit about what those additional non-budgetary responsibilities around education are. So that's one of 2 questions, but I'll stop there for the moment and then ask the other.
We did. IBO has always been a part of the education task force, which works with OMB and city council and city controller's office, the state controller's office, to analyze the Department of Education's budget. We still sit together and discuss the DOE's financial status review material. But you're right, we did pick up additional duties. So we now have probably about 6 analysts who are doing education research on a variety of different things. Some of it is quantitative research. And it's really, we're looking at really just every issue that we can possibly. It's difficult because if you know the Department of Education budget, it's very, very large, and it's a lot of work to kind of get your arms around it. But, originally we started out with a focus mostly on the budget, but now we've grown to, we've been legislatively mandated to do just a variety of education research topics.
Thank you. Also, the other question I had is a little inside baseball, but one I'm very curious about. I have a history in finance at the department, so I'm familiar with this, but the underlying fair student funding formula is not administered equitably across all schools. And that's based on long history of how it was put into place initially. And there are schools that are receiving less than 100% of the fair student funding formula and schools that are receiving at least 100%. So my question is, in light of the COVID impact on funding, has the DOE made any accommodation to those schools which historically have been underfunded according to the fair student funding formula?
Okay, so yes, every year, the Department of Education says that they work to increase the number of schools that are fully funded. They had yet to be able to fully fund 100% of the schools. I wish I had a crystal ball to say that I know what's going to happen for next year. I couldn't even begin to guess. The only thing that I can say is that as for the school deficits this year, they were at least able to give a 25% credit to every school. So they are actually going to be forgiven 25%. So, the schools will not pay back that full $177 million that I quoted you. They'll pay back something in the neighborhood of 45 million, which is a boost. In regards to FSF specifically, I honestly do not know what's going to happen, but you're right. They have not fully funded. I mean, if you're thinking about, constructing, I guess, an argument, if you will, that's to say, why are you even asking schools that were never fully funded to pay back a school deficit? I would 100% agree with that argument. I really would. Because it just seems like an extra, just an extra to the schools that were never fully funded. Yes. But do I know, can I say to you right now that I know like what is going to happen? I don't know. I don't know if they will use stimulus money to bring everyone up to 100%. I don't know, because again, will they be able to sustain that once the stimulus goes away? That's a great question, though. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think next up, I now know that the order that it appears in my list, thanks to our Zoom training, the order that it appears on my list is the order in which people raise their hands. So I think next up we have Robert, and then Seema will be after Robert.
All right, thank you, Courtney. My questions sometimes seem to be a little naive because I'm not an educator per se. But I wonder if there's a study of the pattern of the attrition. So for example, are we losing students to other districts, cities, or are they attriting to charter schools, for example, if the charter school is a factor in all of this, and which is a private sector phenomenon, right? And then on the heels of that question, if it's an appropriate one, I'm not sure, that let us say that the losses are attriting to the charter school system. Is there something in policy with respect to the relationship between public schools and charter schools where the public school system is remunerated for the loss to a different school, a different educational system altogether, really? I don't know if that question was clear enough.
I do think I understood your question. You're wondering if the traditional public schools are losing students to the charter school sector.
Or to other districts, which we would expect, someone like me would expect that they're going to other districts and other cities. But in fact, as I think about it, are we losing a good number of students to a different educational system, which is the charter school?
Yeah. Okay, so what I can tell you is that I believe the DOE recently reported overall system-wide that there is a 14% decline in enrollment for this year. I do not know that we are seeing that a similar decline for charter schools. I do not want to say that there is definitely a migration, a one-for-one loss. I don't think we've done any research to directly make that claim, but I will say that I have looked at charter school enrollment over many years, and charter school enrollment has not declined in I don't know how many years. They are up to something like over 100,000 students. And the last time I checked, which was probably in December, there are still a handful of charter schools who are expected to open next fall. My charter school enrollment projections are indicating increases in enrollment. I wish I had brought those numbers with me as well. I could give you a firm number, but I'm not projecting any declines in charter school enrollment. And we know that there has been a decline in traditional public school enrollment. You know, can I say that that's definitely where the migration is happening? I don't know for sure, but those are the trends that I am seeing.
Well, my gut tells me that that's where they're going. And so thank you for the answer. The other question would be, and just something to think about, I guess, whether in policy is with respect to the relationship between the two systems, if there is, accepting the premise that in fact, we know that that's where we're losing students and that some of it is unavoidable, that is there a remuneration factor in the equation, the funding for the public school, given that we expect our losses to go to this particular place? Is there something in the balance sheet for us in public schools? And given that the migration is not controllable, so that in the budget, is there a percentage or something in the formula that says if we can prove that you've lost 17% of your students in the course of a year, then you get a credit of 7% per student. So you understand the idea I'm trying to convey to you. So that does policy accommodate that kind of thinking?
I don't know of any policy that does that. I wish it did.
Okay.
Write a resolution on it.
All right, Seema.
Hi, I thought your presentation was fantastic, so thank you for that. I have two questions. One's a quick one. So you talked about enrollment numbers as a really significant driver of revenue to the schools. Is it really the only driver? There's no like fixed cost allocation per school, like depending on, you know, the state of its physical plant and that kind of thing?
There is a fixed allocation hiding in that fair student funding formula. And
I see.
I'm actually glad that you brought that up, because I think it's a base allocation. I forget what they call it now. They might just call it the foundational base. And it's something along the magnitude of $225,000. But I wonder if that amount is sufficient. That amount has not changed in many years, but probably the cost of what that, the cost of, how can I say this? What that money should be paying for, probably the cost has gone up over the years, but the actual base amount has not grown. So yes.
Got it. And my second question is, I loved, you had a slide that talked about maybe there are different ways we should be thinking about some of these attrition numbers. I found that really compelling. Like, are these temporary problems? Are these part of a longer trend? You know, I've been reading a lot of articles about everybody moving to Florida, but maybe just kidding, they're all moving back. You know, so if this is a temporary, or let's hope that this is a temporary thing, that people maybe did leave temporarily, or they stopped going to school due to, you know, a whole bunch of reasons, and will come back next year. You know, is there, it feels like everybody acknowledges this is an extraordinary year, and yet we're sort of still pretending that things are business as usual, and you should have to account for a dramatic change in enrollment when maybe it's actually just a blip. Is anyone sort of thinking that maybe there's some latitude that should be given the circumstances?
Well, I think the DOE is acknowledging that by giving that 25% credit.
Mm-hmm.
That's one step. I don't know if that's sufficient or enough to help people. You know, so if I were trying to be creative about things to ask for, again, you know, that I gave you a slide on the deficit repayment plans.
Mm-hmm.
That's not something that's written in stone. Those are Department of Education policies. You know, maybe there's an ask somewhere in there. Maybe you could say, you know, we need the plan to be a little more lenient. We need a little more wiggle room in the plan because this was an excessive 1 year. You know, it's worth an ask. You know, you may get no, sorry, we can't do it. But as long as we're asking, that's maybe something that's not written in stone. It's not legislatively mandated that repayment happen on that schedule.
Mm-hmm.
But so, you know, that's one area.
Got it. Thank you.
Great. Ira?
Okay, so I'm going to run a little bit over because I've been taking some notes here. The 14% in our district is somewhere between 10 and 20%, depending on the school. And some of those numbers are without regard to the demographics of the school. And I will say, as just an anecdotal fact, I have kids in high school, middle school, and elementary school. The people are still leaving. We're taking a survey now in my elementary school of who is leaving. We have, just give you a little anecdote, we have 3 PTA presidents. One of them resigned because she's moving out of New York City. Family's moving out of New York City entirely. One has actually been doing remote learning for the entirety of the school year. So we only have 1 out of the original 3 who is actually really here, to the best of my knowledge. So things are changing. We do have data available to us right now that tells us what is happening in 21-22 school year, because we have the statistics as to who has applied for kindergarten admission, to pre-K admission, to middle school. Middle school assignments are going out in May, I understand, this year. We know who has submitted high school applications. So these numbers are knowable. They're not absolutely accurate, but certainly we do have the ability to get a preview of what's happening in 21-22 right now, and we can find out how it trends compared to previous years. And so when we're talking about this, we really, really need to know whether this is an ongoing issue or not. From whatever I can see, I think it is an ongoing issue, but once again, that's only anecdotal. But the data, there is data available. We need it now, because if this is going to be a multi-year problem, we've got a bigger problem. The other thing that's interesting to me, and this came up in a recent CEC meeting, we have these deficits, but at the same time, as Yolanda noted, these deficits can be rolled over, and they can almost be rolled over ad infinitum, almost the way a farmer rolls over their debt on the land. So my question then is, why is the Department of Ed, shows you how long I've been doing this, is terrorizing the schools and the parents if they don't really have an intent to actually make good on this? And if they have an intent to make good on this, that's even worse. But neither of these approaches are really productive to building comfort levels in parents to remain in the school system.
Agreed. And actually, I'm just remember, we also do have Naveed on from CEC3, so which I'm really happy he's here to join us, because he's going to talk to some of, I know you were on that CEC call. He's going to talk to that as well. So if you have questions for him, he's on. He's going to talk to us in a few minutes.
Okay,
do you have a specific question for Yolanda? If not, I'd say let's.
Yolanda is one of the people with the data,
Perfect.
so I'm talking about
Great.
The data. One of the other things is even as expenses are, let's say, even though the funding is decreasing because our enrollment is going down, the reality of it is we now have to make up for right now, we have to make up for a year and a half of what I will call, I'm going to be very polite, deficient, inferior, inadequate, whatever word you want to use, education. So then we have to come up now and look at a 2 or 3 year remedial period to make up at the very least for what this is. And it's going to be much more severe trying to deal with high school and middle school students because we have less time to do the remedial work. And the kids, particularly at the high school level, and less so in the remedial at the middle school level, have had less time, even if they were in blended learning. Just so we're clear about this, everybody knows the concept of blended learning in high schools is going to be somewhere around 25 days out of a whole year. Right now, it's about 8. So we don't even know what's going to happen. So how are we going to deal with this if our funding is going down and our needs are increasing? So our educational deficit in terms of
Ira, can you let Yolanda, you have some questions? Perhaps we can ask Yolanda. There's other people waiting.
Well, okay, my first question is, okay, if we're looking for questions here, the first question is, are we going to have access to the data for what the enrollment is or what the applications are so we can see what's going on? Do we have any idea of how to do a recovery and what the recovery is going to cost? And those are 2 big things that need to be addressed, or else the deficit gets, both the educational deficit and the financial deficit It's
Yolanda,
huge.
can you,
So-
perhaps Leanna can answer those for you. Thank you, Ira.
It didn't quite come out in the wording.
Okay, I think she understands.
Yeah.
No worries.
Okay, so I will say this. I think your stimulus money is going to probably be used to fill the learning loss gaps. At least that's what I'm hearing. I think the new chancellor is headed that way. They've had a lot of info in the press actually about doing a summer school program, which hopefully it will be as broad as it can, and that will probably be funded with the stimulus money. There is a significant portion of the stimulus money that's supposed to be dedicated towards learning loss. So that seems like the right thing to put the money towards. And again, the long-term problems, I think that's something that it won't be solved magically overnight with stimulus money. You're really going to have to look at the schools themselves on an individual basis. I like to say that every school is a snowflake. They're different and unique. So it's really going to have to take an effort by, whoever the leader of the school is, in conjunction with, people like you all, the SLT teams, the school leadership teams, whoever is on that CEP committees, everyone is going to have to really, again, think about, is it long-term? Is it short-term? If we're dealing with short-term, then maybe we can use that stimulus money for short-term solutions. If our problem is long-term, then we really need to think about, some of the systemic, things that we've already talked about here. And among them, of course, formula considerations. I mean, at this point, this is the rainy day. This is the moment. If you're gonna, swing for the fences, I think this is the time to do it. Questioning what's in the base of the formula, question the per capita amounts of the formula. Look at all of it. Maybe none of it's sufficient. Maybe none of it ever was sufficient. All of those things I think are, if it's not legislatively mandated, I would question it and ask about it and try to advocate for some type of relief.
Awesome. Okay, Natasha and then Stephen, and then we're going to go to Naveed because I suspect there will be some more questions for Naveed as well. So Natasha.
Yeah, I actually don't have a question. I really enjoyed the presentation. Thank you, Yolanda. I just wanted to say, I hope you will come back in a few months when you have, the data, the comparison, the analysis about 2021 and all those things that you said, whether this is a temporary or a permanent problem, new or old. I would personally really like to learn more. And to me, this is an ongoing story. This is not the end of the story. So I hope you do come back. Thank you.
Great. Agreed, Natasha. Ongoing for sure. Stephen, and then we'll go to Naveed.
Thanks. So I just have two quick questions and then one sort of open-ended question to help us or give us advice. Very specific to COVID, I think I know the answer, but a very specific question is, earlier in the year when the deal was struck with the UFT that dictated how teachers were to teach, whether it be in-person, hybrid, and remote, which made schools hire more teachers this year. I'm just curious, were they given more budget? Were they not given budget? Curious if you know anything about that, because all of a sudden I think administrators were told they have to hire teachers, and I'm curious how that was handled in a budget.
Okay, so I did not look specifically at that issue. I'm just going to answer in the theoretic sense, because you may have heard that there were more teachers hired, but I don't know if they were actually able to realize that. But for the most part, if teachers were hired and they were placed in schools, then they were definitely funded for those teachers. It's possible that if the school itself couldn't pay for a teacher that was needed, if they had to hire, then probably the central office may have fronted them an allocation in order to pay for it. I have not specifically followed that. And I don't know that there was a lot of hiring actually going on, to be honest with you. I haven't seen the numbers of teachers increase dramatically. I can tell you that a lot of people were called in to teach that were already being carried within the Department of Education budget. So there were teachers that were in absent teacher reserve that were used to fill in. There were pedagogues in central offices that could have been called in. So there was a lot of fill in with existing staff rather than hiring of new staff, which would essentially be not like adding more money, but kind of like modifying and readjusting the funds, maybe from one area of the budget to a school's budget or something along those lines.
Okay, if you ever have any follow-up, I'm actually quite interested in that topic, but thank you. A broader question is, do most schools traditionally set aside money for the October, make good, or I don't remember what we called it. And I'm curious if you have any specific data, like 50% do, 75 don't. But is that a traditional, if you're running the school, are you traditionally setting aside, don't want to say a slush fund because it sounds bad, but I think you understand my question.
I do, and I have looked at it. They set aside something, it's called a register loss set aside. And I actually do look at that. I'm so sorry I did not bring that info with me tonight as well, but I have looked at that in the past. And I can't sit here and say most schools set aside 50%, but they are all asked if an enrollment deficit looks likely, they are asked to set aside money in anticipation so that, they won't schedule funds and pay for people and then have to go back at the mid-year and rip it all apart. It's heartbreaking. So they are asked to do a set aside. Some of them can do it more easily. Some of them can pay the whole amount. Some of them can't. So, again, it's that snowflake experience where every situation is unique, but they are asked. It's a register loss set aside.
Yeah, we've spoken to various principals, and some say I'm in good shape, I'm in not shape, and I was just curious if they're required to be in shape or not. So one's a request that you don't have to give now, then might go ahead. I know that you shared that I wrote it down, the 14% was lost. And to Seema's point, I'm curious if you could share with us in the future, if you have the data, if there's a rolling number on that for the last 5 years. I'd be curious if it was a trend, as to her point. But my bigger question I want to ask her, sort of open-ended, is my biggest concern is that's not discussed today is the state to city money. We're going to get a lot of money, and it's got to go from the state to the city. And it's my understanding that we've traditionally been shortchanged in terms of formula. I think there's a traditional concern that we're not getting we're not getting the money we should. And I listened to Schumer again this morning, who said he's going to make sure it comes down. But my understanding is they proverbial call the second floor. We're sort of at that mercy. Could you give us advice if we were to put together a resolution today on how to advocate for that, and not just, hey, send the money down, any details or specifics? And if you can follow up with us, I think it would be very helpful, because I think one of the number one things we can do is to make sure that as much money from this relief package, even if it's a one-hit wonder, gets down to us. And your advice would be helpful in crafting something that's very meaningful.
I would love and be honored to provide you with some hard and fast data that can help you with it. Yes, I do need a little bit of time to think about that. And yes, I'd be very happy to provide you with whatever it is that you think can be helpful for you. Yeah, I mean, we do know that the last go round, the state did actually supplant the stimulus money for the city. So, it was a wash. I know everyone wants to avoid that happening. So Yes, let me think about that. And
Any
I'll
data
definitely-
or not, but again, I think that's
Yeah.
my biggest fear as a parent and then also as a volunteer is, that money obviously is going to plug a lot of holes, and the future is still the problem, but let's plug the holes now. So and the current environment and arguments publicly make me even more concerned about what's going to happen, but that's a different conversation for a different day.
Yes, I hear you. I will jot that down, and you will definitely hear back from me.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Yolanda. That was, I second all the comments about that being really helpful. Next up, we have Naveed Hassan from CEC3. So CEC3 has also been talking about and thinking about this issue, and they've had some recent discussions that I think will be helpful to inform our argument here and our discussion. And I'm really excited that he was able to join to talk us through what the what CEC3 has been hearing and what they're thinking about as well, and a little bit more of a deep dive into our own district. So, Naveed, thanks for joining us.
All right, thank you, Courtney. Thanks, Yolanda, and everyone else for your questions. I feel like, so we've been talking about a lot of the issues so far, but I want to start by sort of emphasizing what, as a CEC, we're trying to convey to the DOE, to the city, and to the state as our next steps of what to do now in the next month, in the next 2 months before September and then ongoing. The two things that come to mind immediately are that schools should be held harmless for situations out of their control. The coronavirus pandemic happened and it imposed sudden disastrous costs on the school budgets that are not expected to continue forever. And those were through no fault of the school's own policies that they might have other issues, but this is not one of the issues that they should be held accountable for. So if there are, I don't like to call it stimulus money because its main function for me is disaster relief. We're going through a sort of a public health disaster, which requires people and entities like the government to spend money to keep everyone else safe. So this disaster relief money should be used to fill the disaster relief deficits that are happening this year. So that's one main point that the CEC is trying to convey. And the second one is, I forget, the point that just came up. When money comes from the federal government, it doesn't always get to the schools on New York City streets. So we have to make sure that any of this American Recovery Plan money that is coming to New York State actually gets to DOE schools as it's intended. So those are the two big leading issues that we're trying to put into a resolution, and that should address a lot of the temporary budget issues. I have pasted in the chat a link to Matthew Manner's presentation. Matthew Manner is the District 3 and possibly other districts, but District 3 principal liaison for budgets. And he speaks to every single principal individually every year, and he's been doing it for a while, about any budgetary issues. So he gave a presentation at our last CEC meeting. Some of the people here were also present there. And he did say things like deficits are rolled over year to year, even before the pandemic. And there are occasionally, like once in a decade, there's a surplus somewhere in the budget that's used to essentially provide amnesty for schools. So debt is forgiven. And that provides some hope to the principals that definitely this sort of disaster deficit will be forgiven as soon as possible. Other things he did say was that there will be a 25% discount even on the current deficits, and that you'll only be held accountable possibly for 75% of it. And what else? Let me paste my work that I've been doing. I'll put another link in the chat right now. So I've been working on a spreadsheet that tracks data from late summer, August, September of 2020, and February of 2021 that takes data from the Department of Health, which has the most reliable information of which people are actually in school buildings and which people are not in, are remote. And this means students, teachers, and staff, all of them. And I was trying to create a breakdown of which schools in our district and District 3, the DOE District 3, will have staffing problems. So if you look at the staff numbers, the teacher numbers in the sheet that is labeled, I think it's 2020-09, which is September 2020, you'll see that there's a lot of schools that have a lack of on the books teaching staff. And that creates huge issues when trying to do both hybrid and remote teaching. Shortly after I collected that data, the city was like, okay, we really want to say that we're opening schools. And for that, we have to bring in adults into buildings to make sure that they're both teaching the people that are socially distanced in classrooms and teaching the kids that are at home in a way that actually works, especially for the younger kids. Some parents or some even non-parents, citizens of New York, were saying, why can't they do simultaneously both? That's not something that works for very young kids. You really can't ignore the kids that are physically there and try to engage the child that's at home over computer and have it sort of work when your kid is 5 or 6 years old. So they really did need those extra people. And whether they came from Central or the ATR or some hires, I've had principals tell me that they've suddenly been able to hire a lot of people. I saw that between last year, September, and this year, February, there's about a 50% increase in the number of adults allocated to East District 3 schools. So I had a bunch of red lights saying that this school is going to have a lot of in-person problems that all went away by February. So that was good to see. But the question remains, who's paying for that? Is it already, is it a movement from one part of the DOE budget, the central budget, to the schools, or is it sort of this one-time COVID expense? And I don't know the details of that myself yet. The other data in this spreadsheet that I just pasted is some columns about the mid-year adjustments. And that came from CB7's spreadsheet that I sort of integrated into mine and got more up-to-date data, I believe on March 10th, which I think these are final numbers for academic year 2020, 2021. And you'll see that column, if you're looking at it, is highlighted in different shades of red. And the schools in District 3 that have the largest mid-year adjustment deficits are the darkest red. And in my read of this data, it's the schools that are the most over-enrolled normally pre-pandemic. They're in neighborhoods that generally have much higher median rents. So if you were living here in those neighborhoods during a pandemic and looking at what you're paying for rent and looking at the next 1 or 2 years, you might have decided, okay, it doesn't make sense to stay here right now. We'll go to a lower cost of living area until things blow over. It might not be financially feasible to stay here. So the schools that were over-enrolled in more expensive neighborhoods have the largest mid-year adjustments and the largest potential register losses. I don't know for sure whether this loss will carry over into next year because I don't have the projected numbers for next year. That's it for that sheet. I feel like I will stop now and answer any questions related to what I know. The way I gather data is from public information sources. I don't have any inside track into getting DOE data, and it's always very frustrating at the CC. But luckily, there's a legal mandate for reporting in person and remote people to deal with public health issues. So I have a handle on that. And there's a school budget information that's always available on InfoHub from the DOE. So I'll stop for questions. Thank you.
Yeah, this spreadsheet is really impressive, and it will require a lot of time. I'm really impressed by all of this. I saw Roberta hand first, and then Seema. So we'll start with Roberta.
I didn't have my hand up. Sorry about that.
Okay, then straight to Seema. And Stephen.
Thank you. So I guess I just have some clarification questions about the deficit, because I don't know why, but I just assumed that schools weren't really allowed to carry a deficit. So is this idea of changing allocations based on enrollment numbers not as big a concern to you as I thought it would be?
So that we were worried about that a lot until Matthew Manor came to our last meeting. He's a DOE employee and deals with school budgets, and said that really we have rollovers of budgets year to year all the time. It's just much more common this year with more schools, and they don't intend to force austerity onto the schools at a time where they're struggling to survive in some sense and struggling to serve the students in a way that actually makes educational sense. So doing austerity at a time like this is insane. So he agreed with that, and I hope that they'll stick to that sentiment when they actually do next year's budget reconciliation. Oh, one thing I was hoping is that, so by my estimates, we should be getting somewhere about $4.7 billion out of the latest stimulus disaster relief bill. And that is way more than enough if that actually reaches New York City. That's New York City's number to cover this some $100 million hole, and hopefully actually put us on a good track to do all of the academic catch up that needs to be done, including summer school. So I after the last meeting with Matthew Manor, I was feeling much more optimistic. And
that's really great to hear. Can I ask you one other follow-up question?
Absolutely.
Since you are sort of very well versed in the numbers and also with the schools in our district, do you have a sense of sort of what correlates with attrition numbers? Like, is it certain types of schools, certain neighborhoods, certain families?
The schools that were popular had around them neighborhoods that were expensive. And so those are the schools that lost the most number of students. I think families really? Yeah, the schools that have families that were living in expensive neighborhoods decided, for 1 year at least, we're not going to be living here. So we're actually pulling out of the school and the city for now. That's the biggest driver I've seen so far of register loss.
Hang on, not as much. I was just actually going to say, I think that it's important to say that's what happened in our district, but when you look citywide, I don't know that. In fact, I think it was often the reverse based on what I'm seeing and hearing, and so I don't think that's indicative of a citywide trend, and rather more just a kind of snapshot of our district.
I can only speak to District 3 information because that's all I have, like, sort of purvey.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, Stephen, and then Ira.
Yeah, I have a specific question on one of your sheets, so I want to make sure I'm reading this right. So when I'm looking at this sheet about the teachers, and it says students or teachers on site, looking at Sarah Anderson, 69 to 10, is that meaning that 69 teachers are in the building, didn't get a deferment, and are and down that line? Am I reading that right? You're muted, Nami. You're muted, sir. Lose Naveed? You didn't like my question.
Naveed, I think you're muted. Can you unmute yourself?
He might have had a tech issue.
Oh, we may have lost him.
Up as well, so.
Oh.
I had to switch tabs, and I'm on a device, on a mobile device. So whenever I switch to another app, it pops me out of, it shows that I'm not there, sorry. That shows that 69 teachers are at some point physically in the building, and
is that a nuance of physically?
Don't have accommodations, and 10 of them
don't have accommodations.
Yeah, and 10 of them are not in the building. They have accommodations. If you switched, there's another sheet in this tab. You can see the same data for the same school that was in September. Can you look at it and just tell me what the number is? It should still be 10. 10 is the one with accommodations, but it'll have a different on-site teacher number for Sarah Anderson.
I'm not.
It's somewhere on the bottom. So
I'll play with it, and then I'll get your thing offhand if I have
it'll
to.
Be much lower. It'll be somewhere like in the 30s.
Yeah, it says 33.
In September, they had 33 physically in person at that school, and only 10 with accommodations. The number with accommodations didn't change between September and February, but the number that is actually on site did, which shows
so
me.
What is that delta? Is that a hiring? Then what is that delta between?
So that's we don't know. It could be reshuffling around. Central employees now coming into the building, ATR teachers, and then also hiring. There's a lot of substitute teachers that are filling in for certain things. And there's some teachers that I know, principals that have told me they've hired a lot of people. They don't know.
That's my understanding, and I respect Yolanda's opinion, and that's why I asked that. And I've heard other things when I've spoken to people, and I'd be interested in, I don't want to take up the time, but I'd be interested in talking to this offline. I want to understand that for a handful of reasons around budgets.
The way I know these numbers are accurate is because they're actually coming through a legal channel that they have to report to the Department of Health, the State Department of Health, how many people actually go into buildings so that they can do contact tracing.
It's very interesting.
The numbers are real. So that's the more than I can say for data I get directly from the DOE.
That's great, and I want to move on, but I'm curious because one of the things we've been talking about is the continued opening of schools, and one of the main things that I've talked to, including my son's school, is the challenge that they have at opening schools now is teachers in person to handle in person based on deferments that will go to the end of the year, and that's where some of the questions that I was asking, because even if we wanted to open up based on a handful of things, I think there's some limitations, and that was the date.
And there's definitely a school by school difference. So some schools had a lot of deferments.
Yeah.
That 10 number could be like 40, which constitutes 50% of their teaching staff. So those teachers and staff are still on deferment until the end of the school year. And some schools that I spoke to principals and other staff members, they just have a square footage issue. So even if they had more adults, they just don't have anywhere to put students. So
I think that could change if the CDC
yes, and I had been pushing very strongly to do something with outdoor spaces, but it never really became a formalized thing.
Yeah.
And the weather is getting better, and if we try to do summer learning, there is a chance to have square feet outside somewhere.
So my last thing, and I have I think there's other hands up, is I haven't been able to glean this from the CEC, and that is, what is the CEC's position on opening schools? Are you open? Are you advocating? You're in the middle? I mean, I'm just trying to understand, and maybe you can't speak for the CEC.
Yeah, I can't. I can't.
But maybe you could give me a flowery answer. But I think that I can't speak for the book here, but I think that we have tried to take a scientific approach towards what things should happen. And I guess I'll stop talking and
we're in the same boat. We're in the same boat. We're all parents on the CNC. We're all volunteers, but we all have different experiences at our schools. So I'm at a Title I school, PS 145, and I think about 65 to 70% of our students are remote, fully remote. So that makes it much easier for our school to do 5-day-a-week in-person learning for the students that are actually coming in. There are a lot of issues happening with parents. We talk to parents in other schools and say, oh, your school is 5 days a week. Why is our school not 5 days a week? Well, your school has a 70% in-person population, and that just makes a lot of things physically impossible. So that's a lot of the issues that come up. We're not trying, everything has to go through the CDC and then eventually again filter down through the New York State Department of Health and the New York City Department of Health, just like the money. The rules change that way. And I'm not too optimistic about that change happening fast enough to make a difference this school year. So we're saying, let's please do as much as we can ahead of the next school year to make sure that the maximum number of students can come in. But I don't know if I can't say more than that, because again, it's very uncertain. The CDC could say something new tomorrow, and then how long it takes to trickle down to New York City rules, I don't know.
Well, I'll be advocating for immediate movement of whatever the CDC and the scientists say that we should be doing, and the lag between the two is frustrating. And
the issue we've had is that the mayor is in charge of the DOE. He has complete dictatorial control. So you have to put the pressure on the mayor's office.
I understand. That's the nature of the question.
Affects change there. Yeah.
I know there's some other hands. Thank you very much. I'd love to talk a little offline.
Absolutely.
If we could.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Ira up next. Questions, and then Bev. Ira, you're muted.
There we go. Yeah. At the risk of having sat through some of the meetings that Naveen can't speak to because he's a member of the CEC, I was left with the distinct impression that the CEC members themselves are as frustrated by the current state of learning in our district, in our greater district, the city, as any other parent. So I think I'll let that speak for itself. I think I see you waving head, but I hear no firm statement from Naveed. So
No, I agree with you. We're frustrated. We're
Yeah,
parents. I have young kids at home, so and
Yeah.
I have to work.
In terms of a specific question, I don't know if it exists within the data, but my understanding is the mayor's most recent statements in reopening for September talk about no more blended learning. Either you're fully remote or you're in school. And my question is, has anybody actually done the numbers to see if that's actually possible? And yeah, that's my concern.
Yeah,
Is
mean,
that
I don't, for that question, I don't know, because
Yeah.
Again, they don't offer up data to us at the CEC. We have to really fight tooth and nail to get any information.
right?
And
Is-
if we're in the same situation, let's say it's even still 3 feet of distance, they reduce the distance, it's still not enough to get 100% of the over-enrolled students back in the building. So, because normally
how do
they're
you-
sitting shoulder to shoulder in some of these younger classes on shared desks. So that problem of hybrid learning doesn't go away, and how they plan to solve that without adding more square footage by renting other buildings or something, I don't know.
Yeah, as a side note, I spent many years as a consultant to the SCA regarding school space, so I'm familiar with the problems. So we don't actually have any idea whether it will work, whether we're going to be left with a fire drill come August when the numbers come in.
I hope that doesn't happen again. I mean, we were yelling in April and May of 2020 to start planning for September 2020. They didn't really do anything until August. And
so
if they do
we're-
that again this year, I will be disappointed.
I think there's an argument we should start yelling.
Okay.
Yeah,
Bev,
my other
Bev,
question
yeah.
for Naveed was, I read Matthew Manners a little differently than you did, because at a certain point, he kind of threw up his hands and rolled his eyes, and I felt like he was stating department policy without really understanding what it was, other than it's department policy. And we've often gotten representatives from the department who, when they don't fully agree with department policy, but really like their jobs and their benefits, they refer to it as department policy.
Right.
So I think we have, I think when you watch, for everybody who does watch the CEC, department policy is often, so one of the other things is there's another member of the CEC who's not here this evening, Dennis, who was far more perplexed by Matthew Manners. And did that discussion, I couldn't say for the whole meeting, I think Matthew left, but did that come to any conclusion as to what we did other than roll this over ad infinitum?
No, yeah. So it's sort of hopes and prayers right now that they actually do what's a sensible thing to do during an emergency. It's still an emergency.
Yeah.
And some of these expenses, a lot of these expenses are large one-time expenses because of the emergency. So advocacy, right? We have to say, like, really, guys, you can't penalize the school that's normally over-enrolled, that temporarily has 20% of their students out of the city. And they're unless you know for a fact that they're permanently left. So we have, again, they have to collect data, survey the parents. Are you coming back in September? Do you want your seat? Yeah.
Just as historic.
Yeah.
I just want to give a historic note, is that I don't know if 20% of the parents are going to come back, but certainly having tracked my elementary school for probably 12 years now, it's not unreasonable you can get a 7 or 10% bump in 1 year or another. So I just want to point that out, as that it is possible that you can get large numbers coming back.
Yeah.
All right. So anyway,
So,
that's my.
I also do want to flag,
Hold on.
kind of to your point, what the link, the note that Yolanda just put into the chat. And this was the report that is referenced in one of the Chalkbeat articles I sent out.
Yeah.
She's put a note into the chat talking about one one of the studies that the IBO has done. They did it last fall. They had the study that on the cost to reopen that was got a fair amount of publicity, and I would argue potentially is still going to be relevant for us next fall when we're thinking about all these things. And so that was the estimate, and it was large on the cost to reopen. And I think it's something we want to keep an eye on as we continue to think about what we're advocating for.
Well,
that is not necessarily going to be a one-time need. And then we're going to go to Bev because she's had her hand up.
okay, I just had one very quick comment.
Let's do Bev.
Is the reopening may happen this year, it may not. If you take the parallel of the 1918, 1920 pandemic, everybody looked at it as 1 year. This was supposed to be 2 months. We're now into 14 months now, roughly. So
correct, I would
John,
agree.
a lot of
Okay, Bev.
Yeah, question for both Yolanda and Naveed. Before we can get to fall, we have summer. And the mayor and others have announced that there will be much more intensive summer school for far more students than normally have summer school. And there will be sports and other activities because students have missed out on those. All very good. But in normal years, summer school is kind of a stepchild of the budget because it's in the new fiscal year and there's very little direct funding for it. Most schools who want an extensive and robust summer school put aside money and roll it over so it's available in the new fiscal year for summer school. So you seem to me here to have a collision of sort of fiscal problems in many schools, an expectation of very intensive summer school programming, and is the assumption simply that the Rescue Act will come to our rescue and that this will all be funded from there? Or are there other things at play? What do you understand?
I'll go quickly first because I don't have any definitive answers for you, but based on my experience in the last 2.5 years as a DOE parent, I don't have much confidence in their ability to plan summer programming in a way that would satisfy me as a parent in the short amount of time that we have, especially given that they don't know how much money they'll be getting per school. It's supposed to be significant. I hear numbers in the hundreds of thousands of dollars per school for summer school programming to address learning loss. But it will really be up to the parents who are actively involved, and I hope more parents get involved to sort of step up and say, like, these are the things that we missed. At minimum, we need to catch up with reading, writing, mathematics, the foundational stuff of education, to make sure that they're ready for the next grade, because nobody is getting held back this year. No students will be failed. So that means that we have a lot of remediation that will continue into the next grade. I'm worried. It's an election year. We'll have a new mayor next year. We might have yet another new chancellor. So there's so much turmoil in the administration that it's really daunting. That's to say the least. But I'm staying in the fight.
I've got one question for Naveed. Have you always been lucky, or you're just staying lucky?
It's sort of like it's mind over matter. So I keep my luck, and hopefully you prepare and then you meet the luck.
I took notes. I wrote it down.
I actually have a question, and I think it's probably for Yolanda. When do the principals, this may have been on your slide, when do the principals have to report their estimate for next year? What's their date where they have to start coming up with a number?
Okay.
That might get mid-year adjusted the following year.
Are you talking about a budget, or are you talking about enrollment?
I'm talking about enrollment, which,
okay,
so I understand it, yeah.
The department has a central office of student enrollment and planning, who are, for the most part, charged with providing enrollment projections. Of course, the schools are consulted, but I used to hear all the time that the schools gave their input on a number and the central office did what they wanted to do and kind of gave them whatever number they wanted to give them. So even though I think it's supposed to be a cooperative process to determine an enrollment projection. Different people will tell you different things. Some people were satisfied with their number and it felt right, and others weren't. But there is a central office that's for the most part charged with providing those projections. And, they are numbers that are needed in order to do initial allocations. And those initial allocations come out in May. So yeah, sometime before that is when enrollment projections are taking place. I've never been a part of that office or part of that process, so I couldn't give you a hard and fast date.
And you may not know this, and maybe Naveed does, but so if traditionally, if we're being told, okay, listen, the carrying the deficit forward happens all the time, and this year it's just going to continue to happen. What happens? Two things. What happens if they're supposed? It looks from your chart like they're being incented to put a dent in it, even if they don't have to do it all this year. Like they have to put a dent in it for this year. Starting in the fall. But it strikes me that we are going to have all of the needs that we had this year. Even if we go to 3 feet, we're still going to need space and teachers and safety and all the PPE and all of the things that went into the IBO's estimate. How in the world are schools going to make gains on what they owe, even if they've been forgiven 25%? Like, what are those don't seem like choices that there's any good choices, because I certainly don't see how we could be accessing teachers based on this.
Yeah, no, there aren't any good choices, and it's difficult and it is hard. And this is probably going to be the worst budget season anybody's ever seen. I honestly, again, from where I'm sitting, the best things you can do right now is, again, I can't underscore it, is just to question every single dollar that you can that's not absolutely written in stone, legislatively mandated. If it's a DOE policy, you don't think the schools can handle it, then it's worth asking for a revisit. You've got to have a different policy or do it another way. I don't know what the expectation will be if the schools can make it or if they can't. And you're right, everything is actually crashing together all at once. For now, we're going to have to try to lean on stimulus, which is the only money that we know could come to the rescue, as sad as that sounds, So yeah, it's not a healthy fiscal environment right now at all. So there's just going to be, again, they're going to have to keep their eye on the things that are important to them and hold on tightly to that. If it's, whatever the program is that they are really tied to, you're going to have to hang to that, decide to fund that, hope that STEM is going to come and fill that gap, and just do whatever you can do. Hopefully, the central office can also see how bad the fight really is getting for some schools and provide as much relief and assistance as possible. Additional spending authority, give it if you can give it, whatever, work those policies the best you can work those policies. That's honestly what I can give you right now.
Are there other hands, Courtney?
Roberta's got her hand up.
Sorry, my earbuds just went out at a very inopportune time. Roberta, I see your hand.
Yolanda, this is really scary. I mean, I raised my children in the suburbs. They went to schools. We knew what the budget was going to be. We knew how many teachers there would be. We knew what the financials were. How does a principal, I can't imagine as a principal how you organize your year for your students and for your teachers and all the ancillary stuff that you have to do for the school. I mean, it's just like, it's like playing whack-a-mole.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that because I do have conversations with principals in District 3 regularly, and they are working 2 full-time jobs right now. I get emails at 11 p.m. I get emails at 5 a.m. in the morning, responding to questions I had, and then just asking the CEC to try to address certain issues that are coming up because of the current environment. And I have all the respect in the world for them right now, the ones that are here. As some principals retired early on in the pandemic because this is an insane ask for them to do this.
How
So
can they function?
yep, they function by doing a lot of overtime work for free, in a sense. So if they have a strong belief in their school and they believe that that the school needs all these things and they're fighting for it. I'm very happy that we have our principals. So it's really just a lot of volunteer time. I mean, I'm volunteering, right? All of us are volunteers. So
all right, Julian, and then I would suggest that we start talking about potentially a resolution or what we want to do to start shouting about a bit about this. So let's Julian, let's hear from you, and then we'll kind of throw it out to the group.
Thanks, Courtney. And I think some of the questions I have will tie into resolution pathway.
Love it.
I first want to thank Ms. Smith and Mr. Hassan for coming and presenting. Really insightful, and I really appreciate it. I was playing around with my school's Galaxy budget while you were talking and getting into all of that, which is really interesting. And I have one specific question that I don't know if you'll have the answer to, but I'm just curious about it. Because I'm a student in schools, a lot of the way student activities are funded is through per session funding that's allocated for teachers to do after school programs. And I know at my school that number decreased a lot this year, but it was still, the number this year at my school was 300, it was 340. So at Booker T. Washington, my middle school, which is in this district, because I go to a high school that's outside of the district, it was 70,000 this year. And that feels like a number that's higher than what was likely being offered at the school. I was wondering if you had any information about per session funding and how that's being dealt with in this year's budget, because it seemed to me like an area where if that funding wasn't being used, is that something that could potentially roll over? And if we're thinking about a resolution and thinking about what we should ask the DOE to roll over, is that something that can be passed on to the next year?
Okay, I will say, as for rollover funds, it's hard for me to say in any one case, but I did mention the Deferred Program Planning Initiative, and that is the fancy mechanism that they're using to allow schools, that's what they use to allow schools to roll over money. If the per session money is a tax levy source and the department deems that it is in an allocation category that is okay to roll over, and if the school has met a whole bunch of other criteria, if they've paid all the bills and they've provided for everything else that they needed to before the end of this school year, it's possible that they could roll over. But I have a caveat. Because this year is just so weird, for lack of a better word, I personally don't have a lot of confidence in the department allowing much of any rollover at all, because the city needs money, everybody needs money. So I'm not confident that rollover will happen this year. I'm not confident of that. It's a 50-50 because, again, it's such a terrible budget season that it's possible that they might say, you know, hey, if you have any extra dollars, it might just wind up going to the big bottom line, and the school might not be able to access it at all. And that's, you know, a real possibility. So I would not 100% lean or bank on any of that right now. it might be better to say to people, just spend what you have, because really tomorrow is not guaranteed in this budget environment.
I had a follow-up question on that relates to what you're saying about the funds being uncertain, because I guess from my limited understanding of the budget, the other source of funding, apart from tax levy, is from grants that schools can receive. And I was wondering, and this is a more of a niche question, but is there in our work with principals or with schools, is there room for us to share information about grant opportunities that they can receive, provide supplementary funding this year? Is that something we should be looking into, or am I interpreting it wrong?
I don't think there's any reason not to look into that. I mean, that's great. If someone has the ability to identify a grant that the school would qualify for and get the fund, yeah, that's great. That would be a great gift and a great benefit for a school right now, if that's possible. But yeah, I don't know of anything that would prevent that from happening.
So maybe I'm just thinking out loud, maybe that's something that we could maybe have some role in helping facilitate or helping principals, because I know that's a big task to do grant applications. I had one last question, and this relates to maybe a resolution that we can work on, and it relates to what you were sharing about the Fair Student Funding Formula, and how it has issues on its own that sort of pre-exist COVID, and that the full funding is not being applied. I also heard that one of the issues with the Fair Student Funding Formula is that as teachers spend more time in schools, their salary can increase, but the Fair Student Funding Formula doesn't adjust that. The school I go to as a high school, actually, that's one of the teacher salaries keep increasing every year, and it keeps gnawing away at the budget, while the Fair Student Funding doesn't increase. So I'm wondering, and also tying into that, thinking about, like, I think whenever the DOE is sort of approached about the Fair Student Funding Formula, they talk about the Campaign for Fiscal Equity and how they're not getting the full allowances from New York State through the Contract for Excellence and that funding as well. So I'm wondering, in a resolution that we address as a community board, would it be helpful for us, you think, to have a section where we talk about COVID related matters, and then also to maybe address some of the more fundamental issues with the funding system? And do you think the Fair Student Funding Formula is something worth taking on at this time, or do you think it's something worth adjusting for COVID? Sorry, it's a very broad question. Did that make sense?
Yes, it made sense. First of all, I just want to clarify one thing. As for potential problems within the formula, collective bargaining is something that is added and accounted for. Sometimes they will do it outside of the formula, depending on the timing of when collective bargaining agreements are reached, but that is provided for. And in the subsequent year after an agreement is reached, it should be incorporated and accounted for in the funds. I'm not saying that, but what I am saying is that there are certain other areas in the formula that I think possibly have not grown in a manner consistent with other growth. Okay, and I'm speaking specifically about, there's a foundation allocation within the formula that I'm not sure that has 100% grown with other things that it may be funding. And then I'm also speaking specifically about the per capita amounts, which I am not sure that it's 100% transparent how those exact per capita amounts are derived, but maybe that's a place where you could question it. But I also just want to make it clear that Fair Student Funding Formula is a city methodology for distributing funds.
Yeah.
It's not the same as the state.
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. Sorry, I mixed those two together, but I didn't mean to. Yeah. Sorry about that. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for your responses and for coming to this committee. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.
Okay. So I would propose that I think there's a resolution here I think as Julian points out, there's probably a couple different facets of it. But I think we absolutely should be advocating for our schools. They're going to need, it is very clear to me, some support, even with the 25% reduction in the clawback. So I think Julian put a couple of really good ideas on the table. I think I would propose and open to other thoughts here from our guests and from everyone here that there's definitely a component of this that is about advocating to make sure that the stimulus or disaster funds, shall we call them, make it from the federal government to the state, to the cities, and frankly, make it to our schools who are going to need them. And then I do think there's an interesting component here about maybe advocating for, or at least calling out some of the underlying issues that already existed prior to COVID that are impacting what's happening to our schools and their budgets right now. Thoughts?
Courtney, I would just add not just what's happening to our schools, but, and I agree with the basic premise of the resolution, but I think we should touch on historically the issues we've had between state and city, at least as it refers to school funding.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it should be solely because of COVID. I think whether we do it delicately or with a bit of a more obvious concern, if not dissatisfaction, with what has been perhaps an unfair approach from state to city.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mark's hand was up next.
Thanks. I think it's implicit in what you said, but I would like to see us call out very specifically the first topic of many worthy topics we talked about tonight, which is the potential for this clawback, and that I would be comfortable advocating for, instead of a 25% forgiveness, a 100% forgiveness. That this is simply not the year in which business as usual should be conducted, and that it is not a productive use of Yolanda's or Naveed's or your time to try to figure out which of these deficits were occasioned by COVID and which ones were longstanding spendthrift of those crazy principles that go nuts on all kinds of crazy things like books and internet access and, you know, God forbid, sports teams. And we haven't even started to talk about, you know, music, art, and movement, all of which ordinarily would be the first words out of my mouth. So anyway, I would love to see us open with, or at least include robustly, a in-your-face, you know, enough with this deficit nonsense. Nobody should be, you know, Mr. I had I sat in on that nice meeting with Mr. Manor, and I couldn't believe that he was actually saying what he was saying. And then it occurred to me that maybe, like Naveed here with us today, he was expressing wisdom, but not necessarily the position of anybody he works for. And so, you know, I said that badly, Naveed, I'm sorry, but I hope you get my point. That there was no take this to the bank in what he was saying. So anyway, first of many thoughts was let's be upfront about what we're about in terms of that deficit and clawback. In terms of underlying issues with fair student funding, I think a second one that we can also, well, if we're not successful in ending the clawback, then the idea that an unfunded school would be treated equally but not equitably in terms of a clawback, when an unfunded school would be treated the same as a more funded or fully funded school. That doesn't work for me either, but I think we can solve that by using that as one of the bases for why there should be no clawback. I'll shut up now.
Oh, it was great. Thank you. No need to no need to stop. That I completely agree. And I saw a lot of nodding. I saw a lot of nodding heads. Okay, next up on my list, since I can now see order. Thank you, by the way, for that Zoom training. Is Roberta and then Ira.
So I think it's very important that we support the schools, that the schools have not been fairly treated, that we need to I just don't understand how we fund the schools. We are one of the districts with the worst
It's at the table if you want.
with one of the worst in the country of not being fair to all students in our district. And I think it's very important that whatever we do, we make sure that all students have equality within the school district. And to me, I just can't believe it that we are one of the worst school districts in the country with equality for all students. So I think it's very important that we level the playing field.
Ira and then Natasha.
I think that if we're going to write a resolution, we need to keep to the big issues. Mark was talking about some of them. I think I talked about some of them. Roberta talked about some of them. We just have to get to the big bullets of what we want, which in relation to funding, in relation to making up for the last 18 months, and actually last 12 months and the coming 12 months, and leave the weeds of that, in all deference to Yolanda, to our legislators, whether it's the city council, whether it's the mayor, whether it's the governor, whether it's the assembly or the Senate. Certainly we have to remind everybody things that we have to bang on all the time, like the fact that there's this wonderful court ruling that we got years ago that's never been funded. Which was brought up by Blanche. We need to just bring all these things up and just say that we are now neglecting education more than ever before, and just keep to the big points of it. The weeds of where a dollar comes from here and a dollar comes from there, and Matthew Manners, for those of you who watched Matthew Manners explain how the funding mechanism works, and it's 0.1 for this student and 0.12 for that. That's not where we are anymore. We need something now. So, for example, when Bev was talking about summer school coming out of next year's budget, that's great because the mayor can pass that off to the next mayor, because those problems won't really surface until he's looking for his next job. So we just need to keep to a half dozen big issues, half dozen bullets, and not get into the weeds.
Okay.
That's my 2 cents.
Yep, agreed. Natasha.
Yeah, Courtney, I didn't hear if you also mentioned summer school when you were introducing your the resolution that we'll be writing. But I would really strongly advocate for summer school and a robust summer school and early planning for that. I mean, I guess it's already quite late for that. But and that's important because it would give families more confidence to come back early on, and it would also just help the DOE sort out some kinks in the system during the summer when presumably there are fewer kids in the classrooms. That's all I wanted to add.
Okay, thank you. Stephen and then Seema.
No, I'll go last. Let everyone know.
Okay. Seema and then Bev.
My comment is also in line, I think, with what Mark said and Ira, which is that I think we should, I think brevity is very helpful. And I think if we keep it short and focused, it would be more powerful. And to that end, I feel like we should focus at the immediate issues at hand and not try to tackle in this resolution the more like potentially systematic longer term issues. I think it should be focused on here's the crisis at hand and here's what we need to get through it. Those are my thoughts.
Okay. Bev, what do you?
Yeah, I wanted to stress Natasha's point that even if money is there, if you don't know about it until a week before you're planning on spending it, you cannot plan adequately. You can't staff adequately. You can't contract with nonprofits. You can't do all of the things that make for a quality educational program. So I think somewhere in this focus on immediate crisis needs of schools should be a plea for early decision-making and communication early with schools around what is known about a budget that they can begin to plan for summer and for fall.
Got it. Great. Thank you. Stephen.
I just want to agree. I thought Seema said it very well. My personal opinion is short and sweet, to the topic. I'd like to see things over the last 6 months. I think fair student funding is a big issue. Let's have a resolution about fair student funding, on another day. But I would like to be this is what we need over this. We need this money, state this, and whatever we have. That would just be my personal preference. Short and to the point will be much more powerful. And those are my thoughts.
Okay. I personally am comfortable with that. I think in my mind, they exist as two things, but I take your point and I think it's maybe a good one that we can be more impactful if we are more focused right now on this. But I just want to make sure, and it sounds like we all agree that talking about some of the systemic issues that were in the funding formula should be something we talk about further down the line, because I think that's
going to point out, because Doug has his hand up. He's been here.
Oh shoot, I'm so sorry. Why am I not seeing it? Oh,
I just put it.
I also see Naveed's little one's hand up. I don't know if we want to call it.
Now what he's saying, yeah, short and sweet, short and sweet.
I just wanted, what I will say is short and sweet, which is just that I think that indeed brevity, straight to the point, and also emphasizing something that Naveed said earlier, which I think is so important. Words really matter here. If you're going to refer to any funds coming in, definitely don't refer to it as stimulus. This is, in fact, it's American Rescue Plan. This is an emergent issue, and it should be, I think, the words that we choose should really refer to this as an emergent situation, a crisis. And again, to not refer to it as the stimulus. It's an emergency. It's an American Rescue Plan, and schools need to be rescued. Thank you.
okay. Am I missing any other hands?
Yeah,
Okay.
we can vote, I think, or you could we can move to a vote, however.
Right. So shall we vote on all in favor of a resolution along these lines?
Can I jump in for one
Yeah,
more quick
absolutely.
second? Thanks, sorry. I've been trying to do 3 things at once here. Earlier on in the chat, Peter Arnson shared with us some of the disparate impacts that has been experienced by schools in the northern part of the district. You probably have to scroll up a bit at this point to find them. It would be great if I don't know that it changes the nature of the resolution that you now have before you, and which I fully support and recommend others to support. I'm not saying anything to the contrary. But in our whereas clauses, it might be useful to highlight or at least acknowledge that not all schools have been impacted in exactly the same way, and that an ongoing concern for equity is something that drives this resolution and really all of our work, as well as the work of other parent advocates you've heard tonight.
Okay.
I have a process question because I've never been in one of the committee meetings in the CB7. Are you actually writing the resolution right now, or will you do it offline?
No, great
Okay.
question. No, we'll write it offline and revise it, and we will definitely share it.
Perfect.
Yeah,
because
we'll,
I might have to drop off in a few minutes. I have to put this one to sleep.
looks like it's bedtime,
It's bedtime for her.
which is
and,
hopefully happening in the other room in my household.
All right, well, we can prolong this for a few more minutes if you need
Okay.
us to.
No, but Naveed, I can, if you need to jump, that's fine. And I'll circle back with you, and we can make sure that, 'cause I know you guys are working on your own things as well. And we'll make sure that that we're amplifying a similar message.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So I think I will say good night for now.
Thank
And
you.
my email was in the chat. And anyone who has any concerns, questions, they're free. Feel free to email me at any time. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Yolanda, how does
Good to
this?
see what we're fighting for.
Yeah. Yolanda, do you have any kind of thoughts or perspective on this before we go to a vote? Anything that you think we should be thinking about, or does it sound?
No, I think everything that's been said here is definitely moving in absolutely the right direction. And I honestly, I am also impressed and really appreciate being asked to come here tonight. I thought the discussion was really great, and you all actually have said things that have given me food for thought. And we will probably, we meaning IBO, hopefully we're going to be able to put out some published piece of work on the state of school deficits overall shortly. Not immediately, but hopefully soon. But thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you for
Thanks so much for
coming. Oh,
Okay.
appreciate it. And we won't force you to stick around for the housekeeping that's about to happen. But we'll stay in touch, and we'll keep you in the loop for anything that we're doing. And thank you. And please, you will probably be hearing from us in the future to join us, because this is not certainly going to be the last time we have this conversation. Okay, so should we call for a vote on this?
Yes,
Okay,
call the vote.
call the vote. All those in favor of this resolution?
We're going to do committee first and then non-committee members. Is that how we're
Yes.
going to?
Yes.
Okay.
Blanche,
yes.
Okay, so I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 digital hands. And Blanche and I are also 2, so that's 8 committee. Okay, hands down. All non-committee members.
Well, you
Wait,
should ask
wait,
just
his,
no.
hang on.
I don't think there's any no's. I don't think there's any abstains. Please speak out if there is. I don't think so.
All
Now,
good, okay.
yeah.
Anybody against educational funding?
I'll come to your house in a half hour.
Awesome. All right, so
Non-committee.
Non-committee
members?
Yeah. think
I
I'm
see 1, 2, 3 hands.
3 hands.
Any
And-
not in favor of supporting
No.
schools? No.
No.
All right. Okay, so guys, if you guys are okay with it, I'll take a swing and send it around.
Yep.
All right. I'm expecting more feedback on this one, would be my bet than the last one, but we'll see. Hang on, I just see okay. Okay. All right, so I think that resolution passes, and I'll send it around, and we'll try and get it done as quickly as possible ahead of the full board.
Move to adjourn?
No, wait.
Oh, we have more?
New business. So Stephen, should we talk about the letter at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I'll share it. I
Yeah.
think that we have had a conversation about the topic of the tool. It's late in the day. What is it? What do you call it?
Two case closure
Okay.
rule.
I think the 2-case closure rule has come up, and there's some concerns, particularly in the district. And I think that we may, we've done a resolution about, in the past about just the methodology that we use. And we thought to send a clarifying letter that this is sort of something that's affecting our district. And we were going to write a letter about that, and thought just to let everyone know if anybody had any concerns about that. They could let us know, but it was a brief letter in from that perspective. And as a background, there was a series of meetings over the last couple of weeks in which individual schools have expressed a great concern of that particularly rule affecting schools. And this would just be an opportunity if somebody wanted to express reservations, but we were going to make a very short thing, just saying, you know, could you please clarify and, you know, think about this.
The fundamental basis of the letter is we had the resolution, as you may recall, last fall, calling on kind of using basis of science and concern about the an unequal impact on various schools. The 2-case closure rule is based on 2 unlinked cases in a 7-day period, regardless of the size of the school. So in our district, it's being more severely felt by our larger schools, obviously, because it's a heck of a lot easier when your denominator is bigger. And it's really meaning that a lot of these schools are open and then closed and then open and then closed for the 2 cases. It's also significantly more strict than, say, what's on the books in Chicago right now. Mark, I see your hand.
Well, that was actually I think you're starting to get at what I was going to. I'm not sure I'm comfortable unless there's learning to be shared, that the 2-case closure rule is something that we should immediately advocate for its removal.
So the letter does not advocate for its removal, just advocates for looking at it again and making sure
a clearer statement of what is and more factors to take into account. I'm all for that.
And which variables were taken into account when determining 2-case, since other
just to be clear, it does not advocate for any change. It advocates for re-examining it based on the new conditions of the pandemic.
Yep.
And happy to let you see the letter. Is the best, you know, you can see the letter, but that's the way I would describe it.
If that's what you're going for, I'm all for it.
That's what we're going for.
Great. I'll shut up.
Seema. Oop, you're muted.
Muted.
Thanks. Has there been any new guidance that's come down from either the City Department of Health or the state about, you know, now that things have changed a little bit? Nothing yet. Okay.
You're starting to see some more of the studies about school transmission and things like that. It's really not, the letter does not take a side. It just says, listen, since that 2-case closure rule was put into effect many months ago, there's been more data, more science. It's not in line with what's being seen. And frankly, it's impacting, if you happen to be a student at a large school, you've likely been at home. If you happen to be a student at a small school, you're more likely to not have been missing your in-person days. So just asking folks to take a look at that.
I would say in an unrelated sort of update, the understanding is that the CDC is about to eminently change the guidelines from 6 feet to 3 feet, which will have incredible ramifications on what schools can do. That's not related to this, but there is understanding that there's some CDC stuff that could come down the line over the next 30 days regarding schools. Again, unrelated to something.
In support of what Steve said, I think there's more science in the change from 6 to 3 than in the 2 student rule.
Well, yeah, I would agree, but you know.
But also, I think it's not even just 2 students per school. It's like 2 students per school building, because it can be, you know.
Well,
so the it also talks. The letter also mentions co-located schools. I mean,
But I just want to make sure, because for everyone, and particularly Mark, we don't take an opinion. We just ask to reevaluate.
Yeah.
And that's regardless of what we're saying now, not what the letter says.
It's the way transportation rights resolutions. We want this studied.
There, exactly. I hope we're not going to argue for the next hour like they do. So
we're not asking for a study. We're not.
My kid is starving. I'm starving. Let's go.
That's one of those third rail words.
I know. Okay. Well, with that, let's wrap it up before it happens.
All right.
That weird.
Great
Go
job,
ahead,
Coach
Blanche.
Harris.
Go ahead, Blanche.
I move that we adjourn.
Seconded. Let's do it.
No
Thanks for a great
objection. Thank you,
meeting.
guys.
Thanks, everyone. Good job.
Thank you, Courtney, for putting it all together.
Thank you, Blanche.
Thank you.
It was a great meeting.
No, group.
Things out.
And also thank you to Mark and to Bev, who put up with multiple emails and phone calls from me bugging them all month. So thank
Bring
you.
it on, anytime.
This was
Thank you all.
Good night, guys.
Night.
Peter, thank you.